If you've ever asked your child, what were you thinking? Or why did you do that? Or what in the world goes through your mind? And they go, I don't know.
There's a jelly bean up their nose. Exactly.
So yeah, we're logically as adults looking at this saying, what in the world is going through your brain? Children only have the capacity to live in their emotions. It is our job as adults and also as parents to meet our children where they are, not expect them to come up to us.
Hey, everyone, and welcome back to Love, Happiness, and Success. I'm Dr. Lisa Marie Bobby, and I'm so glad you're here today, particularly if you're a parent. Or maybe you want to be a parent, because today's episode is all about helping kids thrive emotionally and also about how to create a happier and more peaceful atmosphere at home, something all parents want for our kids, but also for ourselves, right? And today we're going to be exploring a very powerful, evidence-based method of helping kids called child-centered play therapy, how you can use some of these strategies in your home, in your life with your kids to help you create some of this zen. So whether you have a preschooler, school-aged kid, maybe even a terrible teen, you are going to discover how creating a safe and also playful environment at home can help kids work through big feelings, improve their self-esteem, and strengthen their relationship with you. And I'm so excited because today we are speaking with a special guest who has dedicated her career to teaching parents how to use these techniques and also some new strategies to help you nurture their emotional health and yours, quite frankly. So welcome, Dr. Brenna Hicks.
Thank you. Well, thank you so much for having me. And I'm so excited about this. This is probably one of the most exciting things for me as a clinician is to meet with parents and coach and train parents to implement some of the strategies that I've learned in my career and how that transforms the parent-child relationship in the home. And that is cyclical change, which is what I love, because I can intervene and help a family for a short period of time, but parents can help their children for the rest of their lifetime. And I think that that transfer is so powerful when parents really can understand how the relationship is at the heart of parenting.
You are really equipping parents to be doing these things at home, as opposed to like sending the kids off to treatment and then, you know, for an hour a week at most with somebody like you, only to then come home and like the rest of their time is with their parents. And
Right.
What happens in that relationship is really where the rubber meets the road. So, okay, we're getting ahead of ourselves just a little bit though, Dr. Brenna. First of all, I think it would be so helpful for our listeners just for you to explain a little bit about what child-centered play therapy is and how you feel like it is different from maybe other play therapy models even, or other types of therapy that are designed for kids. Like what makes this special?
Oh gosh, we need 4 hours. All
No
right,
pressure.
I'll condense.
Okay.
So let's start with the very beginning of why we do what we do.
Mm-hmm.
Kids are not rational.
No, they're crazy. Can I just tell you, just a little aside, especially when our kids were younger, my husband would refer to them as the drunk roommate because they like fall asleep in weird places, barf on themselves, like freak out about things that did not make any sense. And so there we are. That's like step one. The kids are insane. Okay.
Well, so what that tells us is that from an adult, cognitive, rational, intellectual frame, children's behavior, the way children interact, their capacity to have relationship, it's foreign to us. And this is the whole premise of child-centered play therapy, to circle back to your question, because if we could sit down and talk with children, we wouldn't need play therapy. If children could verbalize what they're feeling and experiencing and going through, then directive approaches would work. We could just sit down and lecture at them and talk to them and teach them, and everything would resolve itself.
Mm.
But interestingly, because adults have the capacity to live in both worlds and children only have the capacity to live in their emotions, it is our job as adults and also as parents to meet our children where they are, not expect them to come up to us. So the child-centered play therapy approach says they're here and now, emotional beings. They live in the moment 100% of the time, and they experience life.
Mm.
So if you've ever asked your child, what were you thinking? Or why did you do that? Or what in the world goes through your mind? And they
So,
go, I don't know.
there's a jelly bean up their nose. Exactly.
So yeah, we're logically as adults looking at this saying, what in the world is going through your brain? And the reality is when they say, I don't know, and that frustrates us, it's a
Mhm.
truthful answer.
Yeah.
They don't know. They did not think about it for 1 second. It was an experienced emotional response to the moment in which they found themselves. And they just did what they needed to do in the moment to
Yeah.
address whatever the feeling was. So child-centered play therapy is predicated on the knowledge that kids aren't rational, number one. And then number
Mhm.
two, that we believe that children naturally want to behave in more self-enhancing ways, but they have to be given the time, the tools, and the opportunity.
Mhm.
And how we conceptualize time, tools, and opportunity is there has to be a relationship in which there is safety and security,
Mhm.
and there has to be an environment that's conducive to change and healing. So the entire premise of us as clinicians working with a child, but then also helping a parent to implement the same strategies with their own children is the environment and the relationship. If those two factors exist, children will naturally self-actualize, which is a fancy word for becoming a better version of themselves.
Yeah.
And we know that kids don't want to behave in self-defeating ways. We know they don't want to stay stuck in dysregulation. We know that they want to be more effective in relationships and in moments and in obedience and all of the things with which kids struggle. And part of it is developmental. But the other part of it is we have to provide them with the conditions that allow them to heal and grow and change. And so that's one of the things that CCP, child-centered play therapy, works to do is it creates the relationship and the environment from parents and their children or therapists and the children so that growth can
Mhm.
occur.
Yeah. So it sounds like, I mean, very strengths based. And I'm also almost hearing like a Montessorian kind of philosophy, like in the right environment with the right um, fertilization, almost water and sunlight, nourishing soil, like children will naturally grow into their best selves and have a trend towards health and actualization, as you call it. So
Yes.
the primary assumption is that kids are well. They just maybe need some support in being able to manifest that. Is that
Mm-hmm.
the right way to say it?
Yes,
Yeah.
and it's ironic you bring up Montessori because I
Mm.
was Montessori educated, our son was Montessori educated, and the model is so closely aligned.
Hmm.
And it's trusting that the child knows what they need to do.
Yeah.
And it's really understanding that if we trust children and we get out of their way, because often the approach is we have to control, we have to regulate, we have to mitigate, we have to manage. And the reality is that kids are very capable, far, far more so than they are given credit for. And they know what they need to
Yeah.
do. And so if we can give them the freedom to do that, it really changes the dynamic.
Okay. Well, I'm gonna stick a flag in this. I feel like maybe we can circle back around to that a little bit more, maybe in a little while, like related to some aspects of this philosophy, because I do have questions as a fellow Montessori parent. I have some questions. But okay, so going back to though what you were saying about A, children being insane, and B, it sounds like adults have a um, expectation that kids should be operating in more mature ways than is actually reasonable. I have a question for you. Speaking broadly, of the kids who come to you or families who come to you saying, I have a big problem with my kid, we need to get them into therapy, something isn't working. How often of the time would you say, as a psychologist, I mean, we are looking at something that does actually require treatment or intervention. Like this kid is really not behaving in sort of normal and expected ways, right? Versus this kid is actually behaving in completely normal and expected ways for their developmental stage in life. But what's really happening is that their parents are freaking out or having bad feelings because they have a narrative in their mind that something is wrong, because my kid shouldn't be falling apart. My kid should be obeying me. My kid should be cleaning their room, or whatever those shoulds are. Like, how much of this do you think is something related to what's going on in the kid versus something that's going on in the parent's mind?
Wow,
Can
what
you?
what a loaded question. Okay.
And it took me like 4 minutes to ask you that question, so I can only imagine how long the response is going to take.
I'll do my best. Okay,
Okay.
so let's start with, I would say there's always a blend.
Mm-hmm.
So you have some true scenarios where the child is very much dysregulated, has very
Yeah.
much gotten to a point where they no longer can get themselves under control anymore.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
But where did that begin is always the question. And it was almost always an age appropriate or a developmentally appropriate response in the moment, which has now become a conditioned pattern of behavior that has
Mm.
now escalated to an unmanageable degree. So I think often what gets missed is what at one point was probably appropriate and it was warranted in a moment. Now the child has learned, well, I have to continue to escalate and ramp that up to get the same response that I got in the first place.
Mm-hmm.
So then we've conditioned a child to keep going bigger and bolder and stronger through all of the behavioral and emotional displays. So I think that's a consideration. I would also argue that many times parents have unrealistic expectations, again, because parents live in a cognitive frame and children don't. So when we expect children to not care about things, and when we go, that is absolutely nothing to cry about. Well, it's actually really, really a big deal to the child, because
Mm-hmm.
kids are overwhelmed emotionally and they don't have abstract reasoning. The only way you can dismiss something that makes you sad and say it's no big deal is if you have abstract reasoning, and children
Yeah.
don't possess that until 12 or 13.
Mm.
So what seems very insignificant and trivial to us is a very huge deal to a child because they're 100% in their feelings. So often what I think happens is child gets dysregulated and
Mm-hmm.
child gets stuck, doesn't know what to do about it. Then because parents have unrealistic expectations or a frame in their mind that isn't congruent with where children are, then parents' approach actually exacerbates what is going on with the
Yeah.
child. And then it becomes a swirl where everything just catapults from there and it escalates in a really quick way.
Yeah.
And then my final thought is that often I think when children are stuck and when
Mm-hmm.
they are really struggling, it is almost always a blend of they have an inherent tendency to be predisposed to something. So let's kind of back this up. So
Mm-hmm.
there are children that are born with a more mild, timid personality.
Mm-hmm.
And then there are children that are born with a more anxious personality. There are children that are born with a very social, gregarious personality. So there's a nature and a nurture component here. So what often happens is there's an undercurrent that has always been present because of predisposition or genetic makeup or just personality temperament that came from birth. A
Mm-hmm.
child is likely to be more fill in the blank from an early age.
Yeah.
And that is manageable to any personality, any trait, until it isn't. So what happens is
Yeah.
you have a child that's bent toward anxiety, but if the anxiety doesn't interfere with everyday function, then the child just has a tendency to be a little bit more nervous than other kids.
Mm-hmm.
But something almost always triggers and sends them over the edge where now I can't tamp this down anymore.
Right.
So it used to just kind of be an undercurrent to my life. Now it is up all the time, over the top, and no one can ever recontain it.
Mm-hmm.
That's when it seems as though kids have gone off the rails. But the reality is there's a nature and a nurture component, and parents often don't understand that the predisposition was at the start of this. We didn't go from 0 to 100. We were already at a certain level. It just ramped up. So perspective is really, really valid when we're looking at what's going on with kids. And that's one of my main goals, is educating parents with objectivity, new perspective, and the why behind what's going on. The why always is a game changer for parents.
Yeah. I could totally see that. And I love what you're talking about, that it's not like one unidimensional thing. There is an interplay. There is a personality and a tendency, traits, if you will, then combined with the family system. What are parents doing in response to whatever the kid is doing? And also things they experience. I mean, you and I both know, like, childhood trauma is unfortunately very real. And then you throw some of that into the mix and it can start going into different directions. But that a kid may have, I love the way you phrase it, a difficult time controlling themselves. And that's when they really need help and support. So if it's okay, what I would love to do just a little bit is to, first of all, talk about, with the understanding that it is always different from kid to kid. It is not a monolithic thing, but generally speaking, what goes on in this play therapy model? Like your theory of change, your understanding of the pieces that need to shift or be different in order for a kid to come back to that state of natural well-being. I want to talk about that first, like what happens in therapy. And then I would love to turn that into a discussion of what maybe parents and families can draw from this that they could just experiment with at home if their goal is to just support their kids' overall wellness, because maybe they're not dealing with an issue that has risen to the point where it requires intervention, if that makes sense. Would that
Sure.
be okay to talk about
Yeah,
that a little bit?
absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. So take us into intervention. I mean, you have a parent or parents come into your office with a kid, and like what's bringing people in typically, and where do you go from there?
Okay, so child-centered play therapy is well suited for almost any issue for
Mm-hmm.
children 3 to 12.
Okay.
So there isn't really a specific issue that I can pinpoint as this is the dominant thing.
Mm-hmm.
It can be from situations and circumstances. It can be aggression. It can be academic struggles, relational issues, anxiety, dysregulation. I mean, there's all
Mm-hmm.
kinds of things. It kind of runs the whole spectrum.
Yeah.
But what's fascinating is that the thread that I see woven through almost everything is what was appropriate, normal response at one point has just gotten so far out of control that no one can rein it back in.
Mm.
So, in any raw, organic moment where a child was truly scared, for example, something was very alarming, shocking, scary for a child,
Mm-hmm.
that was a moment where they had an appropriate reaction. But then what happens is it spirals and it escalates and it continues and it develops. And because of lots of reasons, now all of a sudden we have this highly, highly anxious child that won't do anything alone, won't sleep in their own bed, won't go to school, won't leave the house, and so we see what would have been appropriate at one given moment
Mm-hmm.
that has now become so big it's unmanageable. And so parents are almost always looking for really essentially someone to walk through the journey with them, to where it's like, hey, I can't help my kid anymore.
Right.
Parents always want to help their children,
Of
but it's
course.
gotten to a point where I can't do anything. I've tried. I've exhausted my resources. I need someone else to come in and not only help me, but help my child as well. And the beauty of that is that the child comes into the playroom and we start off as strangers.
Mm-hmm.
The parents have met me. The child hasn't met me until the first time they come to play. So the child comes in and we establish a rapport and trust and a bond between the two of us. And it becomes very apparent to the child that this relationship is unlike any relationship that they have anywhere else in their lives. Why? Because it's unconditionally loving and it's unconditionally accepting.
Mm.
And see, the neutrality of a therapist, the third party objective person that comes in, there's no need to react. There's no need to have an emotional response. There's no need to be bought into the outcome, because the only goal is unconditional love and acceptance. And no other relationship in the child's life can extend that 100% of the time.
Yeah.
So the dynamic that's created is completely different than anything a child has ever known. And in that relationship, everything flows from there. So we know that children, when they have safety and security in the relationship and a unique environment, the playroom, it's predictable, it's constant, it's stable. It is something they can count on to be the same every single time they enter. So in this safeguarded environment within a safeguarded relationship, they are free to explore the things that they need to work on. They're free to test and prove what they're capable of. They're free to come apart at the seams and see what will happen and if they can survive that kind of vulnerability. They will test aggression. They will test anxiety. They will test power and control. They will test good versus bad. They will come in, and they're not given that opportunity anywhere else, because kids are really protective of the people that they love.
Mm-hmm.
So they're not going to let their parent or their sibling or someone that they care about see them at their worst. They're not going to let them know the depth of their pain. They're not going to let them into all of that vulnerability, because it has to be a unique relationship and a unique environment. So everything is kind of wrapped around this idea that the child comes in, and because of the unconditional love and acceptance, the safety and the security and the safeguard of the environment and the relationship, now all of a sudden I can dive in.
Mm-hmm.
And as soon as they dive in, again, we believe that the child will naturally want to behave in more self-enhancing ways. They know what they struggle with. No child is blind to their issues.
Mm-hmm.
We often feel like we have to tell kids what's wrong. You can't be mean. You can't hit. You can't talk like that. You can't whatever. Kids know. They know. It's not a cognitive knowing. It's an innate knowing. They don't want to be dysregulated. They don't want to be out of control. They don't want to lack emotional vocabulary. All of the things that we get frustrated with about children, they don't like that state either. And they will get themselves out of it. So the playroom is this really special place. The toys are selected. They're not collected. They all serve a purpose. We respond in very specific, scripted, framework-driven ways to the child that are designed to be therapeutically impactful. And over the course of time, kids will face what they need to face. They'll conquer it. They'll work on it. And they come out the other side as a more regulated, confident, controlled, happy human.
Amazing. Okay. Can I ask you, though, a question that I think a lot of parents have, and legitimately so, right? I mean, because with therapies that are designed for adults, honestly, it can even feel kind of obscure, but I think that certainly I feel that part of my responsibility as a therapist is to explain clearly to a client, here's how this works. Here's how cognitive therapy works. And here's why I'm asking you to do this. It's like the mechanism of change. And unfortunately, I think that a lot of people in talk therapy as adults don't get enough of that. But I think with this kind of play therapy, a lot of parents struggle with like how to connect the dots between I'm going to send my kid into a room full of toys with you for an hour once a week, and they're going to play with dinosaurs in a sandbox or puppets or whatever you have in there.
Both.
And how exactly, and how is that going to turn into them doing their damn homework, because that's why we're here? And like, what, like it doesn't, it's like, what's the math that you would explain to a parent? And I heard everything that you said around emotional safety and unconditional positive regard and like working through things. But for a parent being like, How does this work?
Yes, it's a question I get asked daily.
I bet. Okay.
I'm not surprised you want to dive into this. This is my repertoire every single day.
You're like, I've done this before.
Yeah,
Okay.
so many times. Okay, so let's start with kids get stuck.
Okay.
So a child gets stuck feeling like they have no power, no control. And let's be real, kids have very little to none. They're told where to go, why to go, how to go. Their lives are dictated to them almost 100% of the time. Then you throw in circumstantial loss of power and control. You throw in familial loss of power and control. You throw in all kinds of other levels, and a child feels absolutely powerless and completely devoid of control. And therefore, their proverbial pendulum gets stuck in, I have no power, no control. Well, guess what? We're wired as humans to hate that vulnerability. So what happens is kids will start power struggling. Kids will start grasping at measures of control because they don't want to stay stuck on this side. Well, the beauty of the playroom, and to answer your question, how does this work?
Yeah. Kids
come in and they are in an environment and in a relationship where they can swing the pendulum to the other side. So eventually, let me be really clear, when they come in, they're going to power and control to the hilt because they have the freedom to do so in the playroom. I have been handcuffed for weeks at a time. I have, you name it, the power and control is there as much as humanly possible for most kids. But here's what happens. They hate that feeling. They know that an extreme of anything is unhealthy. It is an inherent way that we understand the world, and extreme is never healthy. You can't have all the power and control, just like you can't have none of it. So what will happen is the pendulum will swing, and there will be a massive shift. The playroom becomes the practice ground to see what it's like. So I've been stuck in feeling absolutely powerless. So therefore, I'm going to grasp at every bit of power that I can possibly take. I don't like this feeling. I know that I have to swing. And kids are black and white, concrete. There's no vague, there's no nebulous. It's one or the other. So their only antidote, as far as they're aware, is I have to swing to having absolutely no power and no control. So what will happen in a play session is the kid, after 26 sessions, will say, you have to send me to jail today. Oh, now I'm the one with all the power. I'm the one with all the control. And they willingly put themselves in that position because they need to practice what it feels like. They have to dip their toe in the water and see what it's like. They have to get a sense of, can I handle this? Can she handle this? What is this going to be like? Am I going to survive this giving up of power? This is so scary. This is so overwhelming. What do I do? And then when they go to jail, because they've told me to send them there, and they get handcuffed for the first time in 26 weeks, now all of a sudden there's been a pendulum shift. But here's the beauty. They realize that that is also not healthy to have no power, because neither end of the pendulum is ever healthy. So eventually over time, they learn balance, and therein lies health. So I can't have power and control all the time, but I also can't have it none of the time. So how do I take appropriate power? How do I have appropriate control? So then after I got handcuffed and went to jail for 26 weeks, and then they get handcuffed and go to jail for however many weeks, you know what will happen? Now all of a sudden we're working together and we have to send the bad guys to jail. That's appropriate balance of power and control because it's means to an end. And bad guys deserve to go to jail. It's justice. So now we're in a position of power that's appropriate. Now I'm taking control over something that needs to be addressed. And that is where we find health. So that's just one illustration of how this actually works. But I think it's also helpful to point out there are 4 consistent ways that a play therapist responds to a child in the playroom. And for time's sake, I can't dive into them, but I will at least share what they are. So we reflect children's feelings. We set neutral and appropriate limits. We provide age-appropriate choices, and we encourage them rather than praise. So these are the 4 most consistently used skills, if you will, in a play session. Now, you're talking about how does this work? How does a parent, I guess, internalize or conceptualize what actually is happening in there? So when I reflect a child's feeling, what it does over time is it builds a child's emotional vocabulary. When a child has an emotional vocabulary, they can accurately identify their feelings and then effectively communicate them. Guess what that does? It eliminates tantrums. It eliminates meltdowns because now I can say, I'm mad at you right now, rather than throwing myself on the floor in Publix and kicking and screaming until you buy me a toy.
Mm-hmm.
When we set appropriate and neutral limits, a child learns increased regulation. They learn to control themselves rather than wait for someone else to control their behavior for them.
Mm-hmm.
If you do that one more time, I'm taking you out of here. You want to know what a child learns?
Mm-hmm.
Get as out of control as you want to get, go as far as you want to go. And when you finally cross a line, someone in your life will regulate your behavior for you.
Mm-hmm.
That's not self-control. That's not
Mm-hmm.
self-regulation. Setting neutral and appropriate limits gives children the opportunity to practice what it feels like to comply with limits. That's development of self-control and self-regulation. When we provide choices to children, it increases worldview. It helps them understand what I do in this very moment is beyond just me. Because I can choose to throw this at you right now. I've been bruised, bloody, you name it, collateral damage in a playroom. When a child chucks a Hot Wheel at my face and I'm, dripping blood down the side of my eyebrow,
Ooh.
they learn worldview really quickly because guess what? They chose to do something that was reckless or impulsive or aggressive or angry or whatever the root cause was, and it influenced something more than just them in that moment. And they hate the feeling of that. So what do they learn through that? I don't ever want to behave like that again because I did not like the outcome. That's increased worldview. Then we esteem build and we use encouragement phrases rather than praise. Why? Because a child needs to develop a sense of who they are and they need to develop an internal locus of control.
Mm-hmm.
So when we encourage children rather than praise them, now all of a sudden they start to believe that they're competent. They believe they're capable. They believe that they can problem solve. They trust themselves to handle situations. So 4 skills yield 4 outcomes. That's the simplest way to describe to a parent what's going on in a session, aside from the pendulum swing analogy.
Wow. This is amazing, because like what you're describing, it sounds like such a deep and purely experiential process where you're really enacting these power and control pieces and really yielding all power and control in a way that is so unusual for a child to experience, particularly with an adult, letting them drive until they kind of go all the way down into that and sort of do a natural bounce off the bottom back into, you're in control, and then experiencing that and then finding naturally the center place of health where we're a team kind of experience, you and me against the bad guys. And also for listeners, so what Brenna and I are talking about with handcuffs and being put into jail, these are some of the enactments that kids will do in a play therapy room. They will barricade you into a corner with pillows or trap you using little toy dinosaurs so that you can't get out from behind the whatever it is. And
puppet theater usually.
Puppet theater. Yeah. Okay. So anyway, but these are enactments that are sort of representing these themes that are very powerful in kids' lives. Okay. But so let me ask you this. First of all, timeline, like you mentioned just in passing while we were talking, for 26 sessions, you have the handcuffs. Like and of course, every kid is different, but like broad strokes, how much time do you think it typically takes for a kid to move into this almost like dream stage and through all of these different things in the relationship with you in order to start arriving at that place of health and balance that you talked about?
So studies indicate that nationwide averages are 30 to 40 sessions.
Okay.
And that's for every issue. So something that is probably largely circumstantial or situational versus much more complex and nuanced. We
Right.
average around 30 to 40 sessions.
So good to know.
And typically what we look for is there are 4 phases. And so we can typically have a sense of where the child is based on what's happening in the sessions. So
Mhm.
we have the initiation where we're building trust and rapport. Then we have resistance, which every client goes through no matter what their age. It just manifests itself differently. Do I really feel ready, willing, and able to dive in and face my junk? And that's extremely scary for anyone.
Mhm.
So resistance is a factor. And then once we get through that, we're in work phase. So we might be in work phase for 20 to 30 weeks, for example, where the child is actively addressing all of the layers of the things that they need to work through. And then the final phase is termination, where we have our countdown and we have a healthy, happy goodbye and closure for the child. But again, you're right. It varies from child to child. I've worked with children for as few as 10, and then I've worked with children for more than a year. It
Mhm.
really just depends on what their experiences are, what they're addressing, if there's ongoing things versus it was an isolated scenario. There's a lot of
Right.
considerations.
Absolutely. Okay. So now let me ask you this, though, as a family therapist perspective. So, what you're talking about is this individual relationship, a very, very special individual relationship with a play therapist and a child. You're going into the little room with the handcuffs and the dinosaurs a day a week, and these magical things are happening. But then the kid comes back out of there and spends the rest of their waking hours at home in their family system that may or may not have changed and may be actively reinforcing all of the things that you are working in that 1 hour a week to begin to move around. What is the impact of that kid's experience in their family? And also, as an extension, what, if anything, are you doing as their play therapist to try to mitigate what's happening in their home life in between your sessions, right?
Sure. So, one of the things that we talk about a lot when we discuss, clinically speaking, when
Mm-hmm.
we discuss what if the parents are not involved? What if the parents are not willing or not able to engage and do their work to change some of the circumstances? The beauty of child centered play therapy is that even if the child's circumstances do not change,
Mm-hmm.
the child is more equipped to respond differently, and they have more resilience, they have more coping,
Yeah.
they trust themselves. So it really increases the child's ability to withstand whatever they face, whether that's within the family dynamic or elsewhere in other environments.
Mm-hmm.
So a lot of it is about changing the child and the child's ability to withstand and handle whatever situation they find themselves. However, we also know that the outcomes are far better. So there's better gains, there's better outcomes, and there's better longitudinal effects, meaning long term, even after therapy ends.
Yeah.
We know that if parents are involved and if they are partners in the process, everything is higher in statistics.
Yeah.
So the goal of a play therapist is always, as much as the parent is willing or able, to equip them with skills, equip them with techniques, things they can be doing at home. And obviously, if they are mirroring at home what the child is experiencing in the playroom,
Mm-hmm.
that just magnifies the
Yeah.
impact that the work in the playroom has. So parents become partners in the process.
Mm-hmm.
And as much as they are willing to engage every 5 sessions with the child, we have an hour with the parent, where the main goal for that time is help me understand what's going on at home. And here are resources, here are strategies, here are tools that you can begin to use. And here's the why. Your
Mm-hmm.
child's responding really well to reflection of feeling. So why don't you start reflecting the child's feeling at home? So we always want to have that partnership, but it's very fascinating to me. I get a lot of pushback from community members that don't understand play therapy.
Mm-hmm.
Well, you working with that kid for an hour each week, there's no way that that's going to do any good when they go back to said scenario.
Mm-hmm.
Well, inevitably, at any age with any theoretical model, the identified client, becomes the change agent within a family. Because think of it as a legal scales of justice metaphor. So many times attorneys or lawyers have the legal scales of justice. So you have to envision the two plates that are balancing. As the child adds a pebble to their side, as a child takes a pebble away from their side, the child is changing, but it necessitates and forces the other side to change too.
Yeah.
There is no way whatsoever, 0% chance that a child will change and it will not impact everyone else in the child's world because you are forced to recalibrate when someone recalibrates.
Mm-hmm.
So the identified client, in this case, the child, becomes the change agent. Now, if parents are willing to change and willing to do the work, does it just exemplify all of the things that we're trying to do? Yes,
Yeah.
100%.
Mm-hmm.
However, the child just coming an hour a week, everyone starts to respond differently.
Right.
Everything starts to shift. It's subtle and it's small. It could be much bigger with investment, obviously. But the child does become the catalyst for change. And we've watched this happen over and over and over again.
Mm-hmm. So you're saying that as the child changes experientially and they begin behaving differently in the family, they start having different expectations of other people in the family, responding differently. It will pull for a different response from the family that may be uncomfortable for those family members,
Oh, it
but that,
always is.
yeah,
It always
but
is.
but that part of your process, and this is an ideal scenario, which honestly I think that most parents would be happy to participate in, is that in addition to working with a kid, you are also actively trying to coach the parent, to teach them how to operate a little bit differently in their relationship with their kids so that the home environment itself becomes more therapeutic, so that you guys are working together for the benefit of the kid.
Right.
Yeah.
It's basically a therapeutic alliance
Mm-hmm.
that is in a little bit of a different context because our therapeutic relationship is with the child, but our
Mm-hmm.
therapeutic alliance is often with the parents
Yeah.
because we are collaborating
Mm-hmm.
so that it is in the best interest of the child.
Brenna, I have to tell you, I am so happy that we are talking about that. Can I share just a personal anecdote with you for a
Sure.
second? Okay, so I have met many people in my life, and I tend to be the friend that my friends call when they have a therapy related question. Like, Lisa, what do I do in this situation? And so not too long ago, I actually got a call from a lovely friend of mine, who has recently enrolled her kiddo in play therapy. And she was trying to ask me, she's like, what should be happening? I am not getting any information from this play therapist. My kid goes in there. She's been going for a couple of months. I have no information. And like, the therapist isn't explaining to her what you are explaining to us right now around here's how this works. There is no involvement of my friend in the play therapy process. And when we were on the phone together, I was like, this doesn't sound right to me. And I guess I'm curious to know, I mean, are there different schools of thought around play therapy, or would something like this, where it's just kind of like no information and a parent like, I don't know what's going on, a sign that perhaps a practitioner is saying, yeah, I do play therapy, but perhaps not operating from the kind of evidence-based framework that you're describing to us today? Because I think it's so hard for consumers of therapy to even judge, like, what is a competent provider, what should I expect? There's like a power differential, and well, the therapist must know what they're doing, right? But thankfully my friend is like, something doesn't feel right, so we could talk about it. But like, what is your take on this?
So, yes,
Mm-hmm.
100% there are different approaches to play therapy. So, the child-centered approach is from the person-centered approach, which
Yeah.
that's much more theoretical than we need to get into, but child-centered is very specifically a model and a system that has a framework that comes straight out of a model that works with adults. So then there are all kinds of other play therapy approaches. So there's Adlerian play therapy, there's Jungian play therapy, there's directive play therapy, there's CBT play therapy. So not all play therapy is created equal. Let's start
Mm-hmm.
there. And not all play therapists or those who call themselves play therapists are created equal. So if you are following a true child-centered play therapy model, and I have no idea whether you're friends with a child-centered play therapist, but if you are following a true child-centered play therapist model, every 5 sessions with the child, you meet with the parent. It's part of the framework. And the intention is You're able to hear an update of progress that's being made, struggles that are still taking place. And then it gives you an opportunity to educate the parents about what's happening and then equip them with strategies and tools to implement at home so that they become the therapeutic partner that we know allows us to have better outcomes. So I think your friend's gut reaction was appropriate. This doesn't feel right because it's not right. If
Mm.
you are trusting a provider to work with your child, you need to know what's happening. You need to be aware of
Yeah.
what therapeutic value is taking place. And you also need to be given tools and strategies when necessary. I mean, look, those are not easy conversations to have. I never like to sit down and call a parent out and say, look, you really need to respond differently. You really are undermining the process here. This is not the way that is going to be advantageous to get to the goals.
Mhm.
Sometimes we have to have difficult conversations with parents, but you can't have any kind of conversation if you're not meeting with them.
Right.
So the goal is always involvement. Now, the parent does not go back and play. That is not the child-centered approach. So it is just the therapist and the child in those hour-long sessions.
Mhm.
But the framework allows for those meetings with parents for the very reason that your friend is reaching out to you. Like, I think I
Mm.
need to know what's going on and I'd like to understand what's happening and I want to know what I can be doing at home. All of that is worked into the process of the child-centered model.
Yeah, got it. Oh, such a good discussion, and I think what's coming up for me is, I mean, even more broadly than related to play therapy. I think Brenna, you and I are both aware that there's a more systemic issue in our entire profession on a more global sense, in that there are a lot of therapists out there practicing, nice people, well intentioned, that may be practicing either outside the scope of their competence. I see this all the time with people, therapists who's like, yes, it's couples counseling, who really don't have specialized training, experience, education in marriage and families therapy. And
Right.
I'm wondering if it's the same thing that happens with, somebody who gets a master's degree in counseling and there are zero things stopping them from going out in the world and calling themselves a play therapist. And so, like, even with my friend, when we were on the phone, I was like, well, tell me a little bit more. Like, what approach does she use? What has she told you about how this works? And she was like, it's therapy, right? And there's just no understanding being received by my friend, but also being communicated by this person. And so I guess what are signs that you would advise a consumer, I mean, a parent who's interested in getting their kid involved with something, to find somebody, and perhaps child-centered play therapy, perhaps one of the other evidence-based models that you talked about, but that a therapist who's operating by a theoretical orientation that has some validity behind it? Because I think that without that, it can really be a crapshoot, and it's such I think a risky situation for a lot of consumers who are frequently not informed. And why would they be, right?
Sure. I think, let me give a really quick history of play therapy because I think that might settle
Mm-hmm.
some of this discussion.
Okay.
So, in its earliest iterations, there was only ever child centered play therapy.
Mm.
So, child centered play therapy is the most long lasting, more than 100 years of evidence based research for it. Child centered play therapy is it.
Mm.
There have been spin-offs, there have been other interpretations with other theoretical models brought in and things like that. But the truest sense of play therapy is child-centeredness. We have that back from 1905. So,
Amazing.
120 years worth of child-centered play therapy, and it has just evolved from there. So I obviously am going to advocate for people to pursue a child-centered play therapist because I do think that
Okay.
there is most grounding there is most theoretical backing there, and there's longevity there. As far as how do you know when someone actually knows what they're doing? So,
Mm-hmm.
yes, unfortunately, there are a lot of people who got a master's degree in counseling and then they started with an agency or an organization or a practice and they didn't say no to kids. So they became the children's therapist, which
Mm-hmm.
then means they were like, well, shoot, I have no idea how to work with kids. So they took a 3-hour play therapy course and now they call themselves a play therapist. That's pretty common. And that's why when you have kids go back into a room and there's one game and one stuffed animal, that is an indication that they see adults and they just will agree to have a child in their room, but they are not a play therapist.
Mm-hmm.
Jody Mullen, a really prominent child-centered play therapist in our space, she always makes the joke, you can't say that you're a child-centered play therapist just because you have a child in the center of your room. So you can't just bring a kid into a room and say, okay, I'm going to be a child-centered play therapist. There is theoretical knowledge, there's training, there's skills. And, let's look at the Chinese proverb here. You have to have 10,000 hours of something before you have mastered it. So obviously we can't hold every play therapist to how many hours have you been in the playroom. If you're not at 10,000, you're not worth it. But there is a sense of what clinical training do you have in play therapy specifically, not just a graduate degree? What play therapy training do you have? What theoretical model do you follow? And more importantly, not even just about the theoretical model, how adherent are you? That is the number one question, because someone can tell you that they do X kind of play therapy. Have them explain what it is, have them explain the history,
Yes.
have them explain the implementation, have them explain the rationale, have them explain the limitations. Then someone is fully adherent to that model, because you can say that you're anything.
Yeah, absolutely. Sorry.
Well, and then my final thought is, so you have to be adherent, you have to have clinical training, you have to really have the skills and the time spent. And then I think beyond that, someone has to absolutely love children. Because someone will agree to work with kids because it's another client. You have to have somebody that understands children, that accepts children, that loves children, that it is their specialty. It is what they exclusively specialize in, because there are lots of therapists that see 8 to 80. There is no way that they are a play therapist if they're working with that range of clients. You work with 3 to 12 or 3 to 14 if you're a play therapist. There needs to be very intentional specificity of what people are saying that they do, because if they're trying to be a jack of all trade, they're a master of none.
I'm so glad we are having this conversation, just as part of a even broader knowledge base for our listeners to evaluate any therapist for anything, including your own personal work, your own marriage counseling, career coaching. Go in there with questions around, how does this work? How do you implement it? Describe to me the model that you adhere to. What should I expect? I don't think that consumers know to ask those kinds of questions when they're first in connecting with a therapist, because they have no idea. And I tell you what, if you are asking those questions and you're hearing things that don't really make sense to you, there is a big indicator that it's like you say, Brenna, because again, a lot of therapists do this. They are generalists. They do a little bit of everything, and they don't really have specialized expertise in the one specific niche, which is actually something that I talk to therapists a lot about, is like, you got to identify your niche and really dig into that. So, okay. Well, I'm just so glad we're talking about this. I feel like this is going to save a lot of people a lot of time and money and help them get better outcomes.
I hope so.
I know I don't have all the time in the world with you, so we should probably start to glide towards the finish line here, because I did also promise our listeners at the very beginning, just to get some of your thoughts around, I guess, two things. First of all, what are some of the simple strategies, the things that parents can do that are child-centered, play therapy inspired, that will help them improve their relationship with their kid and have a nicer time at home? And then also, if you would be so kind, what would be some of the things that a parent might look for that would help them know if maybe they really do need to get their kid into child-centered play therapy? So like, things that work for everybody versus signs that, yeah, your kid could benefit from this.
Sure. So I think the first and easiest thing is a 30-second burst of attention. This is one of the easiest things that a parent can do, and there's so much worth and value in it. So often, because of schedules and busyness and obligations and chores and expectations and whatever, when kids extend themselves to us. So, hey, mom, hey, dad, look, watch this. Did you see this? Look, I want to show you something. I want to tell you something. Parents, we all are guilty of it. We're very quick to say, hang on, wait, I'm busy. Not now. You got to talk to me later. Come back.
You've been watching me?
No, there's no big brother camera in your house. But so what is going on is unintended consequence is you don't matter. You're not important. And what I'm doing is the priority over you. So 30 seconds. Don't feel guilty. This is going to help.
I'm letting it in. I'm letting it in. It's all right.
30-second burst of attention says you can stop whatever you are doing. It does not matter how important it is. You can give 30 seconds to your child. So you stop what you're doing. You get on eye level. You give undivided, focused attention. And you let them say, show, talk, demonstrate, whatever they need to do for 30 seconds. Now, if it goes beyond 30 seconds, which quite honestly is rare, most kids need like 6 seconds. And we're so hesitant to give them any time. And it's like, if you just gave me 6 seconds, that's all I needed. So often it doesn't even go 30 seconds. But if it gets to the 30-second mark, then you have the choice of going, you know what, I'm just going to let them continue. This is a relational moment. This is building our connection. This is building our bond. I'm just going to let this continue. Or if what you're doing is that pressing, you say, I am so excited to hear more about this, but I'm right in the middle of cooking dinner. I wonder if you can tell me more about this as soon as I finish dinner. But you've already provided the 30-second burst of attention, which very clearly communicates you are important to me. And then you set a limit on, hey, I want to hear the rest of this later. But the goal is that nothing ever is perceived from the child's view as more important than they are. So that's a really simple, easy,
beautiful.
like you can do that at any moment, all throughout any given day.
Starting today.
I'm
feeling inspired. I'm doing that tonight.
That's a super easy one. And then I would say one other one is get away from praising your kids and start using encouragement instead. And here's your litmus test for whether or not it's praise. If there is a value-laden word in it, good, awesome, amazing, pretty, smart, fill in the blank, or the antidotes to all of those. In other words, if there's a spectrum, if it has an opposite, value-laden word means it's praise. And here's why we have to get away from this. Because this is what kids hear all day, every day from everyone in their life. And what it does is it has a crippling effect on children's self-esteem and their value and their worth. And if we want to raise confident, competent, capable children, we have to help them feel that their worth is not tied to what someone thinks about what they've done or said. So when a kid shows us their picture from art class and we say, I love it, it's amazing, we reinforce to a child, I'm only worth something, and this, what I've done is only worth something when someone acknowledges it with their words. So the antidote to praise is encouragement. If you start with the word you, you're probably on track. Because keep in mind, praise is always your evaluation of it. What I think about it. I think it's awesome. I think you're smart. I think it's beautiful. I think it's amazing. Versus, you did it. You didn't give up. You figured it out. You had a plan. You worked hard on that. Now all of a sudden it's about their effort. It has nothing to do with the outcome, and it has nothing to do with your evaluation of what was done. And the beauty of encouragement is it can be given even when the outcome is not favorable. If a kid gets a D on a test, it's really hard to praise them. But if a kid gets a D on a test and you know that they gave it their all, encouragement can still be provided.
Yeah.
So it stops kids from feeling crippled by the effects of praise where my value is tied to what someone else thinks of me or what I've done. So we have to break the praise prison. It is everywhere. Schools, more so than anywhere else. But every adult in a child's life uses praise. So the antidote is they need one person at least in their life that's going to encourage them. And what that does is it builds an internal motivator. I do this because it makes me feel good. I do this because I'm proud of this. I do this because I know I'm capable. I do this because I want to try until I figure it out. Now, all of a sudden, it's coming from within, not from without.
Beautiful. And I'm guessing that there's probably a lot of opportunity for all of us to use that kind of encouragement to highlight some of the behavioral things that we wish to encourage. You calmed yourself down in that moment. I saw you get frustrated, and then I saw you take a deep breath. And I really appreciate the way that you handled that. Like that, is that fair to say?
So the first two statements would be very congruent with that. I appreciate that you did that. Now it's what you think about it, and they have to try to please you.
I see.
So if you just say, I saw you take a deep breath and you calmed yourself down, that's focusing on their effort, but it can't be evaluative. So we can't say thank you. We can't say I appreciate that. We can't say I'm so glad you did that, because then it becomes about us again.
I see what you're saying, that you're interjecting your own feelings and putting your kid in a position where now they're working to get your approval, which is counterproductive. Okay. Well,
And then do you want me to answer your other question quickly?
super briefly. I know I've imposed on so much of your time already, but like,
No, that's
really
fine.
just to give parents clarity around, that difference between, yes, we can make some positive changes at home. I can make some changes to the way I am operating as a parent that is going to improve the situation, versus time to get a professional in the mix here. How would
Sure.
you decide that?
I don't know that this is a comprehensive or thorough response, but I would share my top two, I think.
Okay.
So my first is whatever the issue is in the child's life to a point where it is interfering with daily function for the child or the family. In other words, we have undercurrent issues all day, every day. A kid can be sometimes aggressive. A kid can be sometimes emotional. A kid can be sometimes whatever.
Yeah.
But is this to a point where the child can no longer healthily function, or the family can no longer healthily function because it's escalated to such an unmanageable level? That would be litmus test number one. Litmus test number two is going to be, is the parent able to still love and accept the child while allowing the circumstances and the behavior to continue? If the behavior and the circumstance has now gotten to a point where it is overriding the unconditional acceptance of the child, meaning the parent resents the child, the parent is bitter, the parent is angry, the parent has no tolerance, the parent wants to escape, now all of a sudden there's a fracture in the relationship. So if it reaches that point, then it's actually more for the parents' awareness of their own relationship rupture that they would seek therapy. Because if you can no longer accept your child, everything's going to go downhill from there.
Yeah. Brilliant advice, Brenna. Thank you so much for sharing that and so clearly. And those are very straightforward things that we all need to be looking for and thinking about. And if you notice them, we will call Brenna. So Brenna, tell us a little bit more about that. If somebody wanted to learn more about you, your approach, you have a podcast where you talk about this stuff all the time. You also train other therapists on these modalities. So if they wanted to connect with you or a therapist that you have educated and mentored, where would they go?
Okay, so the parenting podcast has been around for a really long time. Everything about the approach is educating you, equipping you, training you as a parent, but through the child-centered play therapy lens. So you're going to get the same skills and techniques and strategies that we use therapeutically to implement at home, and that is Play Therapy Parenting Podcast.
Okay.
So that would be a really helpful resource. There are so many episodes there, and there are 2 seasons. So if you go back and start at season 1, you'll get all of the background, and then season 2 was a little bit of a reboot. So that's going to be a really helpful resource. We offer parent training programs. And so I have trained facilitators that are able to provide a 10-week parent training program. So if any parent would be interested in learning how to implement child-centered play therapy principles into their parenting arsenal and adding that to their toolbox, if you just want to reach out to me directly, that would be a really helpful way for me to partner and pair you with an appropriate therapist. And my email address is Brenna with 2 N's, Brenna, @thekidcounselor.com.
Fantastic. And we'll also include all of these links in the article related to this podcast so that it's easy for everybody to find you and your resources, Brenna. It's amazing.
Thanks so much, Lisa. This was so fun.
This was incredible. I really appreciate you sharing your expertise and perspective with us. I know I benefit from it, and I hope that everybody who's listening today does as well.
All right. Awesome. Thank you.